Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Erwin. As you might know, I'm the SCORI director, and I am here joined with our amazing general assistant, Wing. Wing, would you like to say hi?
Hello, this is Wing from the Netherlands. I'm your SCORI General Assistant, and I will be helping Erin out with this webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, as you know, this webinar will have to do with our SCORI regulation change proposals overview. What we're going to do is try to summarize all the changes that we have and all the future proposals that will be discussed and voted on during the March meeting. So it will be really, really great for you to be here and participate. So please feel free to ask any questions whenever you need it. So we're going to get things started.
All right, so some quick facts first about the regulation change proposals. We have 38 proposals divided in 4 categories, A, B, C, and D. And they go from D to basically A. D is the most significant changes, and A are minor changes, such as a different wording, but the meaning didn't change at all. And then most proposals are proposed by the SCORI IT, and we have some proposals from Norway, but there were not a lot. We will go through all of them. And most of these proposals are exclusive for SCORI. Some are shared with Scopy, so you will see the same proposals also in Scopy. And yeah, that's basically the quick facts. Can you share the screen? I think everyone is seeing me on the webinar.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so the rest you can see also a few links in the description of this webinar. Even if you're rewatching this, there's the link to the discussion document. There are links to the SCORI regulations, the overview sheet, and other handy materials. So please take a look at them, and you can also use them while we go through everything during this webinar. Discussion is highly encouraged, so please discuss it before the General Assembly, so we can use our time at the General Assembly as efficient as possible.
Good. Thank you, Wing. So on how to survive regulation change proposals, you have this great flowchart that was created by our March meeting sessions team member and former NORI of AMEF Mexico, Veronica. So we give credits to her and thank you for the great work. So as you can see, we start all the way on the top on how to survive these regulation change proposals, which if you have experience attending General Assemblies, you know they are quite hectic and complicated at times. But the idea is that we can do this, like Wing said, as efficiently as possible. So we start all the way back with, do I know and have I read the updated SCORI regulations? If I haven't, I have to go to the NORI folder and I can read them. I also facilitated the link in the description below, so you can access them right now. Once you have read and once you know about the updated SCORI regulations, you need to know, do you really understand them? And if you don't, we would recommend you to read them at least once more. And if you still are facing trouble, please find your regional assistant or an IT member that will be more than happy to assist you with the understanding of the regulations. After you know what you're talking about and after you know what the regulations are all about, you need to ask yourself, do I know what the regulation change proposals are? And if the question is no, then you should go back to the NORI folder in Google Drive and make sure that you read through all of them. Also, like Wing said, all the links are below for the discussion sheet and the overview sheet as well. So please feel free to click those links right now and go through them if you haven't done so yet. And then you have to go and read through the proposals document. And if you haven't done that, please do that as well right now, or now that you have some time before the March meeting, it would be a great time for you to go through the proposals and read and analyze them. Once you have done that, you need to know if you understand the change that the proposer is trying to make. And in case you don't, the idea is that once again, you read them again, and if you find trouble, please ask for help. Don't hesitate to contact your IT member or even the proposer of the regulation changes if it's not Discovery IT, so they can give you a more clear understanding of what's going on. Then you need to understand how will this change affect your NMO and SCORI in general. That's why we also decided to divide in categories all the proposals, so you know what are the more vital ones and which ones are the more minimal changes and minor changes that will not really affect the way SCORI works. Then you need to ask yourself if you agree with the proposer. If you agree with the proposer, then you can continue with the regular voting process during the March meeting. Now, the thing is that if you don't, you need to go back and try to contact the proposer or try to know why is this proposal the way it is and try to find a way to understand it better. If you still do not agree with the proposer, then you should go and discuss the regulation change proposals on the Google document. In there, you have comment rights, which means that you can leave comments all around the sheet. So please highlight the part of the text or explanation or regulation change that you would like to see changed or discussed and bring out your opinion. All discussion and all opinions are more than welcome. So we really, really encourage you to take a look and be able to provide your opinions because that's what regulations are for. They are to serve the NMOs and SCORI in each NMO. Then, if the voting has already begun and you do not agree with the proposer, then you can go and make an amendment during the voting procedures. And this we will get to in a little bit. And again, if you do have a better proposal and there's still time now that you have 8 days until the beginning of the March meeting, please feel free to leave those comments and ideas for alternative motions in the discussion sheet. So here we go on continuing with how to survive regulation change proposals. Then you have what we call the motion and debate maze, which is the way that the procedures take place before we go into voting. If you have attended GAs before, then you are probably a little bit more familiar with these. But if it's your first time, then you probably need to pay attention to this maze and try to understand it. We will make sure to explain it at least once more during the SCORI sessions before we begin the voting procedures. But basically it goes like this in a summarized way. The chair will read the motion and then will allow for the proposer to give an explanation. Then the chairperson will ask for a seconder. A seconder is basically a person that agrees with this proposal being accepted or at least being brought up for voting. If there is no seconder to the proposal, the motion will fail. If a seconder is found, then the chairperson will ask for amendments. If there are no amendments, then you will continue for direct negatives. If there is a direct negative, then we will continue and ask for alternative motions. In case that the chairperson doesn't ask for direct negatives, the motion will pass nemo contra, which means without anyone against. If there are no alternative motions, the proposal will be voted on and has to be accepted by a 2/3 majority. If the chairperson asks for an alternative motion and there is one, then the chairperson will open a speakers list, which will contain a moderated discussion on why should we lean for one or other proposal. Then the alternative motion must have a seconder. If there is no seconder, then the vote is back on the original motion. If there is a seconder, we will vote between the original and alternative motion, and we will keep the one that has a relative majority. A relative majority basically means that one has more votes than the other, and that is including the abstentions. If something happens with an amendment, and an amendment is tabled, then the proposer and the seconder must accept the amendment for it to be added into the original motion. And then we proceed with further amendments and then ask for a direct negative. If either the proposer or the seconder do not agree with the amendment, two things can happen. If the proposer doesn't accept the amendment, there will be an immediate vote of the original motion versus the amendment. If the original motion has more votes, then the original motion is kept. If the version with an amendment is voted on, it will be added onto the original motion. If there is a proposer, there will be a question for a seconder. If there is no seconder, we need to find a new seconder to the to the amendment. If there is one found, the amendment is added to the original motion. If there is no seconder found, then the motion will fail. As you might have heard, it's kind of complicated, and indeed it can get complicated. So the idea is that we simplify this as much as possible. And that's why we want discussions to take place before the March meeting, so that we don't have to go through all these complicated maze of finding new seconders and tabling new amendments. Basically, all proposals can be amendment up until the beginning of the March meeting. So you have time to change things right now without going through this whole maze. So we really encourage you to do that, and also to read through this in case that we find ourselves in trouble, so to speak, during the voting procedures. So yeah, as you can see right there, if we went too quick, we really apologize for that. But also, there is a manual that we'll be releasing for you, and it will be shared through the email servers after this webinar with more information on how this particular maze is taken step by step. So now we will continue and proceed onto the regulation changes.
Okay, so first of all, before we go through the regulation change proposals, I just want to quickly say that you can ask questions in the live chat on YouTube. So we will keep a tab on that, and we will answer your questions along the way. So please ask them. It might take a while to answer them, so we don't interrupt anything, but please ask, and we will go through them later. So we start with category D. Which is the regulation change proposals with the most significant changes to the regulations. So our first proposal is by IFMSA Egypt. And if you have any questions about this proposal, you can contact Amr Denori from IFMSA Egypt. The contact details, the email address is on the slide, so you can always contact them. And this slide is about the commitment of NMOs, their commitment to signed and stamped contracts during the August meeting. The proposal is as following. As you can see on the screen, all NMOs must commit to signed and stamped contracts during the August meeting and create the same number of units and with the same conditions mentioned in the signed paper contracts on the database during the allowed periods. Otherwise, the SCORE IT will investigate the issue and penalties will apply. You can also see the explanation on screen. Amr also, this is a direct quote from him. We sign paper contracts at the August meeting and sign and stamp for commitment reasons. Therefore, there are no excuses not to sign them on the database afterwards. We all calculate our capacity before the August meeting and take everything into consideration so we know what we're doing at the August meeting. And not committing to the signed number and conditions of signed paper contracts might create huge problems within the NMOs as it changes the calculated capacity for hosting and sending students. And that the cancelled quota could have been allocated to signing more units with other NMOs. In addition to financial errors in the estimation of the exchanges, budget for a whole term. So this is the explanation by IFMSA Egypt. If you have any comments, any questions, please contact IFMSA Egypt. And the proposal that goes right after, which is 10.3x, is also by IFMC Egypt, and it follows up on the proposal that was just mentioned. And this specifies the penalty that an NMO might get if they do not commit to the signed and stamped contracts. So the proposal is as following. If an NMO does not commit to a signed and stamped contract signed at the August meeting for the respective exchange season, by agreement of both Norries, the NMO will not be allowed to sign contracts at the next contracts fair and hence will be inactivated for one whole term. And the explanation is exactly the same, so it just directly follows the previous one. Once again, if you have any questions, please send them to Amar and you see the email on screen. Okay. I see some questions in the chat. We can go through them really quickly. Hassan Hassan asked, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your surname. How does the amendments pass before the GA? The idea is that you discuss them in the discussion sheet, and you basically discuss it with the proposer if he wants to incorporate that change. If the proposer agrees, the proposer can change their regulations at all times before the GA, and then the amendment will pass easier in the GA. So I hope that answered your question. And Emil asked, how will the discussion work when we make comments in the discussion sheet? How will we go through the comments, or is this simply to raise opinions? In the Google Documents, in the site, you can see the comments. You can create comments yourself with the tools that Google Doc provides. And you can basically also comment on each other. So that's basically just, you can have a whole conversation there, basically. Please also tag the proposer in your comments so we are sure that they will read them. And I hope that answers your question. If it's not clear, please ask again in the live chat. And then we will go on with the proposals. The next 4 ones are from Slamzik, Slovenia. And these are about the deadlines for the AF, CA, and the penalties respective to those. The proposal reads that instead of the AF deadline being 12 weeks, they want to move it to 16 weeks before the start of the exchange, or according to each NMO's exchange conditions. You can see the explanation on screen. Scopy and Scori are the biggest student-run exchange programs in the world. We are proud of our academic quality, cultural exchanges, and social programs, always working very hard to improve our exchanges in every aspect. With this in mind, Slamzik Slovenia proposes regulation changes in regards extending the AF and CA deadlines by 4 weeks. Moving the exchange deadlines to earlier dates will be beneficial to the exchange in many ways, such as the ability to apply for a visa earlier. Visa applications are usually possible as soon as 3 months in advance. Arrange academical recognition or scholarships at home university, which can only be done after the definite project, institution, or hosting city are known. And save money on transport by getting a better deal by buying tickets earlier, which would in turn make our exchanges more accessible to students all over the world. For many of our students, their exchange marks the first time traveling abroad or to the other side of the world. Receiving confirmation 4 weeks earlier would calm them and help them planning. Currently, if the CA is late, students may receive information less than 8 weeks before the beginning of their clerkship, which causes stress and cancellations. We believe that we can do better. Moving the application form deadline to an earlier date should also help NEOs and LEOs, Norries and Lories in arranging clerkship and accommodation spots, enabling them to send the card of acceptance earlier. We know that this change might seem scary to many of us, since we are used to the old deadlines and many struggle to complete tasks ahead of the deadline. such as sending CAs or the NORI report, or even us sending this regulation change proposal minutes before the deadline, the new deadlines will take some time to get used to, but all the extra effort that it may take the NORIs and LORIs to review application forms and ready cards of acceptances will be for the help and benefit of the exchange student, which is, in the end, the essence of our work as exchange officers. So you can read the explanation again in the document if you want to. As you can notice, this also says NEOs and LEOs. This is because the same proposal is being proposed in the Scopy sessions, I will say, and they have also been sent over the NEO server, so they are discussing the exact same proposals as these. Once again, if you have questions, please ask Slomsec Slovenia. The contact details are on the slide. Yes. This is the second proposal by Slomsec Slovenia. It's basically exactly the same, but this is about the CA deadline. Instead of 8 weeks, they would like the CA to be sent at least 12 weeks before the start of the exchange. Explanation is the same. The third proposal, also by Slomsec Slovenia, is also in line with the other ones. This is about the returning of AFs due to capacity reasons. In the current regulation, it states that she returns it at least 10 weeks before the start of the exchange and informs the sending NORI via email. And the change that they want to propose is that the hosting NORI is allowed to return any AF due to capacity reasons only if she returns at least 14 weeks before the start of the exchange and informs the sending NORI via email. Since the AF deadline has been moved, the AF deadline has been moved forward. This is why also this deadline has been moved forward. And then the last one, I believe, from Slomsec Slovenia is also about the deadlines. In the current regulation, it says, in the event a hosting NORI must return an AF for any other reason than stated in 8.5.1.1, the AF must be returned at least 10 weeks before the start of the exchange, and the sending NORI must be informed by email. The change that they want to propose is instead of 10 weeks, they want 14 weeks. So, yep. Oh, this is the last one. Excuse me. So the original regulations say that the CA needs to be sent 8 weeks before the start of the students' exchange. They want to change it now to 12 weeks before the start of the students' exchange. Oh. Okay. So those were all the proposals by Slomsec Slovenia. We have also one proposal from Helmsick Greece. Excuse me that the email address on screen is wrong. Yeah. Okay. If you want to contact the NORI of Greece, you can go ahead. The NORIs can find the contact details in the NORI contact list in the NORI folder. So you can go ahead and contact Isidoros, the NORI of Helmsick Greece, in case you have any questions or doubts about this regulation change proposal. The regulation change proposal is as following. Helmsick Greece would like to remove 6.2.3.6 from the SCORY regulations, which is have at least 70% of EFs for the completed incoming exchanges in the previous season filled by the incomings before the August meeting. So this is about the voting rights, on receiving voting rights for the August meeting. They would like to have this requirement removed. In the explanation, it says, filling the EF in a database is getting more and more difficult as the forms usually don't appear before the end of the exchange, sometimes never. And most of the times, the system crashes when you try to submit them. Therefore, many students are leaving the country without having completed their evaluation form, and the NORI has to rely on the sending NORIs and LORIs to persuade their outgoings in order to eventually fill it. These two problems combined with the required 70% make this voter right criteria a very demanding task for some Noris to achieve, that it doesn't depend on them but on other improbable factors, such as database problems, cooperation of the incoming students, sending Noris or Loris. Last but not least, NMOs have different numbers of incoming students, and therefore they shouldn't be measured with the same percentage. For all the above reasons, we are in favor of removing this regulation until an efficient and more viable EF system is established. Yes, and the contact details for the Nori freeze can also now be found in the live chat that we just posted.
Okay, so continuing with the regulations. This regulation is proposed by the SCORI International team, and it has to do with the failure of obtaining voting rights by the deadlines. So it will read like this. Any failure of obtaining voting rights by the deadlines defined by the SCORI regulations or the SCORI director will result in an immediate investigation. The SCORI director will inform the affected NMOs within 3 days of the deadline. If the NORI is not reachable, the SCORI director will then inform the NMO's president and respective regional director. The affected NMO may lose their SCORI active status from the following term. This is to be voted through a motion tabled by the SCORI meeting by the SCORI IT and voted upon by the SCORI active NMOs with voting rights. The motion should reach 2/3 majority to pass. An explanation for this is that at the moment, there are no consequences for NMOs when they do not obtain their voting rights for the March meeting, besides losing the right to vote at the SCORI sessions. To make sure that everyone completes the tasks given, we are proposing this regulation. With it, we would like to make it mandatory for all SCORI active NMOs to complete their requirements. Otherwise, the SCORI IT will look into the situation together with the involved NMO to see what is going wrong in the NMO and why the tasks have not been completed. It is not a direct suspension of the NMO, but it gives the SCORI IT an incentive to look into the NMO's management of SCORI and possibly understand the problems within the SCORI program. A similar regulation is currently stated in the Skopje regulations. So we're doing this not also because we consider this really important, but also in the idea of aligning the regulations between Skopje and SCORI. Then we have proposal for 10.4.2.x, and it's a new regulation that will state that if the combined amount of very late CAs and super late CAs adds up to 50% of the total amount of CAs, or the amount of super late CAs reaches 30% of the total amount of CAs, the NMO will face an immediate investigation by the SCORI IT. This also has to do with the idea of controlling and, in a way, giving regulation and stating that the SCORI IT will take cards at hand and it will get involved in a situation in case that an NMO is not following regulations. We believe it necessary for the IT to investigate the NMOs that break this rule and possibly question their management of SCORI in case that there are that many late CAs and very late CAs and super late CAs. The penalty will still apply, but we feel it necessary for the IT to look into the NMO and understand what's happening or what has happened and how can these situations be avoided in the future. This wraps up category D. Now, there is a question from Hassan where he says, will these regulation changes affect the 2019-2020 exchange season? To answer you, I will refer myself to the SCORI regulations. In 13.2, let's see, actually 13.5, it says in the second sentence that all approved regulation changes will take effect immediately after the GA unless otherwise specified in the proposal, which means that in this case, the proposers have not given us any specific date by which this must be taken into consideration or done, which means that all the regulations proposed will take effect immediately after the GA. So I hope that clears up the doubt. Now we're gonna keep going. Now for category C, we have proposal 2.6.6.x. This is a new original regulation that says an NMO is excused if the execution of 6.2.3.5 leads to no active projects in the database. In this situation, the NMO needs to have an active project in the database by the end of the March meeting. For those of you that might be asking, what is regulation 6.2.3.5? It says that that for voting rights, for NMOs to fulfill all NMOs fulfilling the following points by the deadlines defined by the SCORI regulations or the SCORI director will receive voting rights at the first SCORI session of each GA. Updating all the projects in the database and mark any projects that are out of date as obsolete before the March meeting. So the thing is that this follows on a situation that happened in January this term, when we found out that NMOs did not have any active projects in the database due to the task of updating their projects. As you may know, it is a requirement for an NMO to become SCORI active to have at least one active project. So this means that NMOs would have to be inactivated if they had no project. So we understand that some time is needed for NMOs to obtain new projects and for the supervising board to get those projects approved. For this reason, we will cover these situations in the future with this proposal in order for NMOs not to lose their SCORI active status. And proposal 5.2.x is again a new original regulation that will state to submit a signed version of the SCORI regulation to the respective RA as soon as his/her term starts. The SCORI regulations form the basis of the guidelines and standards we wish to maintain for our exchanges. Unfortunately, a lot of Noris are still not aware of the regulations. Addition of this task would work as an official motivation for the Noris to go through their regulations. We also believe that this would help to resolve a lot of inter-NMO conflicts and make things clear and easy for Noris in the beginning of their term. Next proposal is 6.2.3.7. It is proposed by the SCORI IT, and it's a change to an original regulation, that's 6.2.3.7. The change that will be made is that instead of stating 2/3 of the LCs before the August meeting, talking about the updating of the Explore pages of the NMO, we will change 2/3 of the LCs for all of the incoming active LCs before the August meeting. A similar regulation change proposal is proposed in SCOPI, and their regulations state that all local committees need to be updated for their Explore pages. Since the Explore pages are shared between SCOPI and SCORI, we thought it wouldn't make sense for us to leave it at 2/3 and for SCOPI to have a new regulation saying that all LCs must be updated. So there usually is quite some confusion on whether it is all LCs or incoming active LCs. And to make this clear, we're adding to the regulation as well, and SCOPI is making the changes necessary to have the same regulation regarding this. Now, going on to 6.3.1, it's a change about the PRET regulations. As you can see, the current regulations are 2 articles that talk about how NMOs should contact the director and the SCORI IT, and sorry, the SCOPI and SCORI directors at least 2 months before the PRET, and also that they should contact with their respective RAs to be responsible for the PRET within that region. The changes made is that now PRETs are going to be regulated by the capacity building internal operating guidelines. Any change to the internal operating guidelines shall be followed by an announcement over the NEO and NORI servers with a justification behind the desired change. With the restructuring of the IFMSA capacity building IOGs, which regulate the workshops in IFMSA, the PRET procedure will also have to undergo some changes. In order to align the work procedure for all IFMSA workshops, we are proposing this change. The contact period and responsible persons are stated in the new internal operational guidelines that were shared with the NMOs and that will be voted upon in the March meeting plenary as a new IOG for the IFMSA. So related to those IOGs, we will now align our work, including PRETs, to those internal operation guidelines. Wing, would you like to continue?
Yes, surely. So we go on with the proposals. Proposal 721 is proposed by the SCORI IT. And the original SCORI regulation is that the hosting NMO can now change the LC after sending the CA unless a mutual agreement between the student sending NMO and hosting NMO is reached. In case the hosting NMO changes the LC without agreement between all parties, the hosting NMO should provide reasonable transportation from the original to the new LC without additional cost to the student. So this regulation is about when a CA has been sent, the student has already booked their flight and everything, they are already prepared to go on that exchange, but the LC has been changed. So the LC where they were supposed to go to is now changed to another LC. And that there could be quite some distance between the two, and this is why this regulation is there. The proposed change that we want to make is to add N back, as you can see in green on screen. It is that the hosting NMO should provide reasonable transportation from the original LC to the new LC and back without additional cost to the students. As the new LC could be quite far from the original LC, it would be fair that the student would also get a transport back. For example, if the airport is actually from the original LC, to get back there. So this is why we propose this regulation change proposal. The next proposal, as you can see in blue already immediately, is a regulation change proposal that's will be discussed within SCOPI as well. The original regulation is that if the unilateral exchange fee has been paid prior to arrival and the hosting NMO cancels the exchange, the hosting NMO must reimburse the unilateral exchange fee to the exchange student. In principle, nothing has changed this regulation, but to us it was unclear of whom the transferring costs would go to, whom should pay those. So we're adding the part that is in green. The hosting NMO is responsible of any cost incurred in the transferring process. So in SCOPI, I believe they have proposed actually the opposite, is that the student, that the hosting NMO can retract the transfer fee from the fee that they were going to send. And thus the student will not receive the whole unilateral exchange fee in case there are any transferring costs. So this will be discussed in the joint regulation discussion with SCOPI, so we can come to a consensus between SCOPI and SCORI and possibly have the same regulation. The next proposal, 10.2.2, is also proposed by the SCORI international team, and a similar regulation change proposal is proposed in SCOPI. The original SCORI regulation says, if the student stays for more than 2 weeks in the host country and complains only afterwards, costs for food and lodging will not be reimbursed and the unit will not be regained. However, the hosting NMO must examine this situation and solve any problems that occurred. So the change is that we are adding actually a line to this regulation that says, if a student leaves before 2 weeks, the reimbursements will be issued according to the mutual decision of both NMOs in consultation with the IT where needed. So in the original regulations, it says that cost for food and lodging will not be reimbursed, but it's nowhere clearly stated that it does. So this is why we are adding this to the regulation to actually say something about this case, that a student decides to leave before the 2 weeks. So that's that. So those were all the proposals in category C, and we will now move on to category B. So these will be changes that are even less significant. So proposal 1.1.5 is about the use of the standing committee name, initials, or logo. At the moment, it's stated that it is strictly prohibited to use them in political, commercial, or religious media. And we're going to change that to that the usage of all these things is subject to the IFMSA Corporate Identity Manual. There are a lot of rules in the Corporate Identity Manual by IFMSA that we all abide to, even in SCORI. And to us, it didn't make sense to just put a little part of it in our regulations. And if it were to change, that we change along with them. So we wanted to make it clear that they're all subject to the IFMSA corporate identity manual, so we wouldn't have to change the regulation whenever the corporate identity manual gets changed or added things onto. Proposal 4.2.2.1 is proposed by the SCORI International team, and it's about the election of supervising board members. In the current regulation, it says that 2 members are elected at the March meeting and 3 are elected at the August meeting. And in the proposed change that we want to make, it says that the amount of members to be elected are dependent on the amount of vacant spots for the upcoming term. And we're also adding that the respective terms for whenever you get elected as a supervising board member. So the idea is that we don't want to fix on how many members get elected at the March meeting and how many people get elected at the August meeting, in case there are more free spots. You can see a sketch of the situation underneath, which you can read on later because it's quite complicated for me to explain it like this. But in the case that someone were to resign before halfway of their term, there would be 1 more spot free. And with the current regulations, it does not allow an extra spot, like an extra person to get elected to fill that spot. So this is why we're changing this regulation. Proposal 4358 is also proposed by the SCORI IT. It's about the tasks of the supervising board members. So that's 4.3.5, and then they have the tasks, which are separated in a lot of different things. One of the tasks is to ensure a free space to be added in the database for an accepted research project within 10 days. But we want to change the 10 days to 3 days. The reasoning behind it can be read here. It could take up to 15 days for the supervising board to revise a project. If the project were to be accepted immediately, which honestly doesn't happen that often on the first try, and the NORI would have to possibly wait another 10 days for the database space to be added, that could lead to 25 days before a project can be implemented in that database. In most cases, it takes even longer as the project needs to be sent back for the NORI for revision. We thought ourselves that 25 days is unnecessarily long, and currently the SP already adds the space in the database immediately as a project gets approved. And thus we are reducing it to 3 days, so there is still a little bit of space for the supervising board to do it, but at the moment it gets done really, really quickly. So those were all the proposals in category D, C, and B, and now we're going to move on to category A, which has the least significant changes, and I will pass it on to Erwin, who can explain those.
Good. So as Wing said, category A contains the least important or the minor changes to our regulations, but they are the most changes out of all categories. So it's going to take a little bit. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the live chat. Thank you for those that have already asked questions. Please keep them coming if you do not understand something or would like some clarification of sorts. So we're going to get things going. Proposal 1.2.6 is to change the regulation that says an exchange season goes from the 1st of April to the 30th of March of the following year. We're going to change this to an exchange season goes from the 1st of April of each year to the 31st of March of the following year. To make the definition complete, we are adding of each year to make it clear that each exchange season takes place during every year. Also, March has 31 days instead of 30, so we're making that change just so there's no one day without an exchange season. Then we have proposal 1.6.3.1 that talks about the Explore pages. As you can see, it states that the Explore pages are coordinated by SCORI together with the Standing Committee on Professional Exchange. Every SCORI active NMO is required to provide information along with their SCOPI counterpart on their Explore pages about their NMO, local committees, and their country. That is useful and of value to the students applying for an exchange. This information does not substitute and cannot contradict the NMO's exchange conditions. What we're adding right now is that to state that in case of any discrepancies, the information provided in the exchange conditions will be considered final. This is just to make sure that the exchange conditions are the definitive representation of the country's regulations or conditions about their exchange. So it's important that in case of any conflict, we set guidelines to know which word is the most valuable. And in this case, we will consider the exchange conditions above the Explore pages. Proposal 3.2 is a simple change. We're going to change the title tasks of the SCORI director for responsibilities of the SCORI director. And this is because all the tasks that are stated in 3.2 could technically be delegated to other IT members as the SCORI director sees fit, as it is currently happening. Therefore, it's more appropriate to call them responsibilities instead of tasks, considering that the word tasks implies that the SCORI director has to do it on their own. And the tasks that the director needs to do are already specified in the IFMSA Constitution and bylaws. So this would prevent that the director delegates the tasks and do nothing by themselves. So this is the minor wording change. Then we have 4.3.5.4 that states that the SB decides if a given project satisfies the criteria of a research exchange project. It has the power to reject a project and return it to the NORI if these criteria are not fulfilled. What we want to add is that it must be returned to the NORI with an explanation of why it wasn't accepted. And although the supervising board has already been doing this, we would like this to be mentioned in the regulations for future references and for the future supervising board members to continue this work of giving proper explanation to NORIs of why projects are not accepted. 4.3.5.5 states that the NORI can contest the decisions of the SB regarding his project by sending a complaint to the supervising board. In this case, the SB and the SCORI-D will reevaluate the project, and the first decision of the SB will be changed only by an absolute majority vote by the SB and the SCORI director. What we want to add to this regulation is that the supervising board member who has been in charge of evaluating the project in question cannot be included in the evaluating panel. This is just to avoid a conflict of interest, and since the amount of supervising board members is now 5, that would add up to a number of 6 votes when the director is included. So this would make it possible to have an even vote, and so it would be kind of complicated to deal with these situations. So we also considered it fair for the SB member in charge of reviewing the project to be excluded from the voting to avoid any conflict of interest or personal conflict that may be found when voting for the contest of this project. Regulation 4.3.5.6 is a removal of the current regulation that states that the SB verifies the project database, investigates on any description that does not comply with the updated acceptance criteria for projects, and reports on these projects at least 4 weeks before the August meeting. This is currently not done by the SCORI SB, mainly because of the high workload they have by revising the new projects. Checking upon the many projects are already in the database to see whether they comply with updated regulations is currently beyond their capacity to perform. So we consider that this task is no longer feasible or realistic for the supervising board to do, considering the huge amount of projects that we currently have in the database. The next proposal, that is 4.4.x, says to work towards the SCORI activation of non-SCORI active NMOs. This has to do with the task of the regional assistants in the SCORI IT. And this is currently being done, so we would like it to be considered part of the regulations that RAs work in the activation of non-SCORI active NMOs. 4.4.x2 is a new original regulation that says to support NORIs in attaining voting rights for their NMOs before the March meeting and August meeting, as per the deadlines set by the SCORI director. Regulations in 4.4, again, are about the responsibilities of the regional assistants, and this task is also being done by the RAs currently. 4.4.5 is a change to a current regulation that states to attend the international IFMSA SCORI meetings in the region, the RMs, and when possible, PRETs in the region. We want to change the word PRETs for SCORI-related workshops. This regulation talks about, again, the responsibilities of the RAs. So we consider that now that there are more workshops created other than PRETs, having the global health within exchanges, academic quality and recognition, etc., we would like to use the word SCORI research camp also being added as a SCORI event. So we want to use the word SCORI related workshop to pretty much sum up all the workshops and initiatives that are being done by SCORI from here and on with this regulation passed. Regulation 4.5.3 states to facilitate the discussion of his division at any time during, if possible, GAs, RMs, and PRETs. And again, we want to change the wording. We want to change the word PRETs for SCORI-related workshops for the same reasons. Okay. On Regulation 4.6.5, it says to support the SCORI director and RAs and to revise PRET proposals sent from NMOs from all the regions. This is a task responsibility of the general assistant. And we want to change this a little bit, and we want to add in the revision of SCORI-related workshop proposals sent from the SCORI IT and from NMOs from all over the world, from all the regions. The idea here is that not only we cover PRETs, but also say that the proposals are not only sent by NMOs, but could also be sent by the SCORI IT. Say during regional meetings, there are times when proposals will be done by the SCORI director or the SCORI general assistant themselves. So then this includes the IT into the regulation if a proposal is done by a member of the IT. 5.2.23, the original regulation states that if hard copies of documents are required, hosting NORIs have to request hard copies at least 2 weeks before the GAs. The change we want to make is that if hard copies of documents are required, sending NORIs have to request hard copies at least 2 weeks before the GAs, or as per the deadline announced by the hosting NORIs on the IFMSA NORI server. The hard copy documents, such as invitation letters, that need to be requested by the sending NORIs from the hosting NORI can take time to be created or printed for the hosting NMO. As of now, the NORI sent email over the IFMSA NORI server to state the deadline for hard copy invitation letters. To make sure those deadlines set by NORIs are valid, we would like this to be added to the regulation. So I hope that this is understood. Then we go on to the next one. That is 6.1.6.f. That talks about plan of action of the newly elected SCORI director at the August meeting only. It is about the presentation of a plan of action. We want to remove this, considering that the plan of action for the SCORI director-elect is being presented during their candidature in the plenary sessions of the General Assembly, namely the August meeting. So they do not present it during the SCORI sessions, which is being implied here. So we want to remove this regulation, considering it a little bit irrelevant to the context of SCORI currently. Regulation 7.4.2.1 says, before sending the application form, the sending NMO should verify the student's English knowledge and check the student's curriculum to verify lab skills of the students. We want to remove this regulation, considering that this is not something specific for 8-week exchanges, but also for 4-week exchanges. In Regulation 10.1.3, it's already implied that the student needs to speak the language and that the sending NMO is responsible to look into the problem if a student's English level is not reflecting the Language Institute certificate. Furthermore, required language proficiencies are already mentioned in the exchange conditions that students in sending NMOs need to check for compatibility and for application. So the idea is that this is a little bit irrelevant, so we want to remove it once more. Proposal 8.5.2 says that the certificate must be signed by the tutor and the hosting NORI or LORI unless the exchange student did not abide by the rules of the LC and by the sending NORI or LORI after the EF has been filled. So we want to change the wording a bit and state that after the evaluation form has been filled by the exchange student, the certificate must be signed by the tutor and the hosting NORI or LORI, unless the exchange student did not abide by the rules of the LC and by the sending NORI or LORI. The previous phrasing could be interpreted differently from what the regulation was meant to tell. The idea in the previous phrasing could be understood as that the sending NORI and LORI can only sign the certificate if the EF has been filled, while it was meant to say that the certificate can only be signed at all after the EF has been filled. So this is just to clarify that this is a regulation in order to issue the certificates that the evaluation form must be submitted by the student. Then we have Regulation 8.6 that talks about the SCORI rules form. The SCORI rules form has been reformed and has been renamed to the SCORI terms and conditions. And so this regulation no longer applies. The regulation about the SCORI terms and conditions are mentioned in 7.3.14. Next one says an NMO suspected to be violating the SCORI regulations, if deemed necessary, or principles will be under investigation by the concerned RA and under the supervision of the SCORI director. The NMO president must be informed by the SCORI director if an investigation is started against the NMO. The changes we want to make is to move a little bit of the words and do a little bit change of wording. And the placing of words in this regulation was a little bit odd. And also we consider it justified that not only the SCORI director and the RA are involved, but also the whole IT in case that an NMO violates a regulation. So we are changing it by removing the if deemed necessary and adding it a little bit after, and also adding the word by the SCORI IT instead of the concerned RA under the supervision of the SCORI director. Okay, so then we have A1, which is a proposal to add an annex to our SCORI regulations. And this is to add the motion and debate maze, which is the maze that we showed at the beginning of the webinar. And the idea is to apply this motion and debate maze to align all procedures between all standing committees. So up to this point, SCORI has used the maze to do the voting procedures, but they have not been mentioned or added to the SCORI regulations. So by accepting this proposal, we will be having a clear figure that will show us the way in which procedures should take place. So this is basically gonna give us a clear idea of how we're supposed to vote and how the steps should be taken so that there are no more voting procedure errors during the SCORI sessions. So this does it for the A category. Now we want to open the space for a few questions if there are any.
Yes, if you have any questions, please ask them in the live chat. We will wait approximately for a minute for you to type your questions, and otherwise we will wrap up the webinar after that.
Also, I would like to take this time to invite you all, if you are voting or if you are in charge of the decision making of SCORI and your NMO, to please go through these regulations at least once more and be prepared for the discussions and the voting so that, like Wing said at the beginning, we are as effective as possible. As you might have seen, our time is limited when it comes to voting and discussion times. So we really want to keep things short and want all discussions and opinions to be given beforehand so everyone can make proper informed decisions during the voting times and the election times. So it would be really great if you could go through this webinar at least once more and prepare yourself according. And of course, for that is the whole IT. You have your RAs that, of course, you can contact through email. You can contact Wing or me as well if you have any doubts or questions, and we will try to help you to the best of our ability.
Even if you have comments on the current regulations and you're for some reason don't know how to put them in the discussion document, please also approach us and we can think about it together. Even if you want to propose an amendment, if you don't agree with a certain proposal or want to phrase it differently, please contact us and we can talk with the proposer, or if it's ourselves, we can discuss together on how we can make it better for you and other Noris also.
Yes. As a final comment, I would like to mention, for those of you watching that will not have their Nori attending the SCORI sessions and the voting, I kindly ask you to please listen to me now. We will need an email sent by you stating who the proxy will be, and this is to the Noris. So I need Noris to send me an email by the beginning of the GA. This means by March 1st at 23:59. That's going to be Slovenia time. I need to receive an email from you stating who are the people that will be allowed to vote on behalf of your NMO in case that you will not be present. So it's really, really important that you provide us with a proxy, because if you don't, we will not be taking you into consideration when doing the voting, because you did not provide us with someone that is not you, of course. If you're a Nori and you're attending, it's all fine. If you're not attending, please send me an email with who will represent you during the voting procedures of the SCORI sessions.
Okay. And last of all, since I see no further questions, if you have them later, please contact us as on the screen is set. I would like to thank you all for joining us for this webinar. And I hope it was very useful to you. And even if you're rewatching this later, please let us know if it was useful so we can continue this for the next GAs. I would also like to thank the proposers for the proposals they have sent in, and also Vero for her help in the making the flowcharts and the manual that will be sent to you guys later on how to vote. And I think that's it from my side.
Yes, that's it from my side too. Thank you so much for attending. We wish you good preparations for this March meeting, and I hope to see many, many of you in just a week. So take care and see you guys hopefully very, very soon.
Yes, thank you so much. And see you soon indeed. All right, have a
Bye-bye.
good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.